Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Have you ever wondered about your own life and some of your, I'll just call them demons right now for a very short-term thought, but about the things that plague you, your unhappiness, and said to yourself, why? What is so bad? My parents were decent. They loved me. I didn't have a terrible life. What's going on with me? That there's this sense of perhaps brooding or something wrong that's inexplicable. Well, I think many people feel that way. And that is why I am so thrilled. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to interview Galit Altas, PhD, who is the author of something called emotional inheritance, not to be confused with emotional intelligence. When my assistant was giving me my chronological list of guests, she wrote emotional intelligence, which is an understandable error. And I said, no, it's emotional inheritance, which is very different from emotional intelligence. So welcome, Dr. Galit Altas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duffy. I'm really glad to be here with you today.
Oh, wonderful. My pleasure. So tell us what emotional inheritance means.
Emotional inheritance is the idea in which emotions, memories, feelings, and traumatic experiences are transmitted from one generation to the next and held in our minds and bodies as our own. And so what I was interested in this book is really the links between our parents' and grandparents' history, and especially traumatic history, and how that becomes our own emotional struggle.
Well, that is so incredibly fascinating, Galit Altas. And then we don't know the origins of it, right? When we say, what I have said to my patients is, well, a lot of this is pre-verbal, and so you can't have a memory of it, a body memory, but not necessarily a mind memory. But this is so much deeper, this intergenerational distress. And my background is obviously different from yours. I'm a social psychologist, so it's a combination of sociology and psychology. And when I have thought historically of intergenerational distress, I have thought about the subculture, the customs, the unhappiness that gets passed down. I didn't think of it on this, actually, what you're saying, genetic level, that our genes actually change from our life experiences, our DNA. Is that? Can you explain that?
So I think you're really right. We are thinking about how trauma impacts the next generation through multiple pathways, not only one, and including epigenetics and and unconscious and everything we communicate through the attachment. And so we're talking about the intermingling of nature and nurture. The epigenetics piece is the biological mechanism by which trauma is transmitted from generation to generation. The impact of the environment, and when we psychologists talk about the environment, we're talking about the psychological environment, of course, and especially trauma, on the expression of genes, right? It doesn't change the DNA. It's about the environmental memory, right? And the way it's almost like genes have a memory. right? They don't change, but they remember. And the environment, right, changes the expression of the genes. And the book is really talking about that dynamic, right, complicated dynamic between what is nature, what is nurture, and a lot about, right, the what's happening between parents and children. Again, not just the genetic piece, but actually the unconscious piece, which is the basis of psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic work.
Right. Is this what Jung meant by the collective unconscious? Do you think, or is that something else?
We're talking about many layers of unconscious, right? The personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, and also what I add here is the intergenerational unconscious, right? And that is what parents and grandparents are communicating with us without awareness and often without intention.
Right. Oh my goodness, this probably, I read your book, Dr. Galit Atlas, cover to cover, like it was a novel. I was so fascinated by each story, like you play the detective. That is it absolutely fascinating. And other people, of course, have not read your book and may not know what we're talking about yet. So the concept of emotional inheritance, Dr. Galit Atlas, this is what we're looking at right now. And maybe could you choose like an easy case to start? Like what would be an example of this?
Maybe I'll start with the structure of the book because it means something about the intergenerational. So the book is divided to 3 parts. Like everything good in life, right? So the first one is our grandparents, and and there are 4 stories, therapeutic tales, I'll call them, that are really illustrating how a grandparent's experience lives inside the grandchild's mind and how it shapes their emotional experiences. And so what we're looking at really is how experiences, and often experiences that we were not told about.
Yeah,
right?
That's the thing, right?
Right. I'm talking about sexual abuse of grandparents that somehow the grandchild is responding to, I'll say. Early loss of the grandmother, that the grandchild is, I'm not going to give you I'm going to spoil that chapter, the first chapter about affair, how the affair is actually a result of some historical trauma. There's a chapter on the Holocaust and the radioactivity of trauma. There is a chapter on sexual identity and how that secret lives inside the child's life and emotional struggle. The second part of the book is called The Secrets of Others, and that is our parents. And that section is really about everything that our parents kept as secrets from us. And didn't tell us. Things that happened before we were born, or things that happened in the beginning of our lives and we cannot know about. And right. And so, for example, there is a chapter about it's called Unwelcome Babies, about an unwelcome pregnancy and how that appears in the unconscious of the child who feels so unwelcomed into the world. And how is that? And I explain a little bit of how that happens, or accidental pregnancies that are unwelcomed and keep being unwelcome throughout life. Those people, and how do we feel that in communication with those people, about loss of siblings that people knew about, but also that people were never told about, and how they keep that alive in their unconscious. And the third part of the book is called Secrets We Keep from Ourselves, and it is about our own, what we transmit to our children, and how we keep secrets. Because it's funny, we always think about as children, right? How we resolve the secrets of the past and the intergenerational transmission from our grandparents and grandparents. And the truth is that I think we always create our own secrets, right? So we resolve something and simultaneously create secrets for the next generation. So that's what the third part of the book is about.
And those things that we do that maybe what Jung would call the shadow, things we're ashamed of that we keep secret. Do you think that that's not completely, but that it's also caused by things we didn't know, but kind of knew about our parents and grandparents based upon a lot of unresolved stuff?
Yeah, a lot of unresolved, untold, or the other option, and there are many. Secrets appear in many forms, right? Some of them, the more obvious, is the things that nobody told us, but there are other kinds of secrets, and those are things that we knew about, but we're not allowed to think about or talk about. Right. So, how do we hold that information in our mind? And I focus on that too. And okay, this is something I know. And I talk about my life in that way. Like my mother lost her brother when she was 10 years old and he was 14. That was not a secret in our family.
Right.
And yet we never talked about it.
Right.
And so it became to some degree a secret we keep. And there is some silence around that. And how do we walk around that, and how does that impact our lives?
Oh, that powerful. How do we walk around the silence?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Dr. Galit Atlas, if one is not in psychoanalysis, what can one do?
That's a good question.
Or just go to you in New York City, right? Or
no.
actually anywhere, because you're available on Zoom.
The truth is that me personally, I don't even accept new patients, but I think that psychoanalysis is not the only solution, right? There are many, whoever wants to go to psychoanalysis, and we can talk about how psychoanalytic treatment is similar or different from other kinds of therapies.
Yes.
Therapy is, of course, my way of working through things. But I think there are many ways of thinking about things and processing things, including, by the way, different modalities of art therapy, group therapy, gestalt therapy, psychodrama, spiritual work, right? There are many communities that helps you. But I think there is something about I'm thinking about reading the book and making connections and thinking about one's life. I think it's to some degree it's more simple than it sounds, because I feel like what we often don't do, and by we I mean all of us, patients and therapists, right? It's our unconscious, right? That's the way our minds work, is reflect and think about and make connections between past, present, and future. And I think there is one goal I had to some degree in retrospect in writing this book, is to create some emotional experiences where one reads something and thinks about their own life and think like, oh, okay, wait a second. I had that thing in my history. How does that relate to what I'm struggling with right now?
Yeah, and that's why I found your book so fascinating, because I was making my own, naturally, associations. And I want to say to everyone who doesn't necessarily read psychological literature on this depth, it's deep and yet it's so readable, because you have your case histories and you just explain how people behave, what their fears and concerns, secrets are, and how they eventually get through, I guess, going into the past.
Yeah.
It seems to me you're like a detective. Well, did you ever notice the parallel between your mother's life and what you're doing now? Mm-mm. Or something like that? So you make the unconscious conscious. Right. And then what happens?
Right. I think that's a great description of the detective psychoanalytic work of like following the clues, right? And putting it together and creating a picture of, oh, just a second, what happened and to whom, and what did I inherit? What is mine? Right. So I think that's part of what we're doing. And you're right. I mean, I feel that in every chapter is not just about the specific interaction between the patient and the therapist. To some degree, it's about all of us, right? I think I could find myself in every story.
Oh, yes.
Every patient story. And
right.
Right. So I think that's what you're saying. What I hear from readers is that they identify almost with every person that is there because it's us. Right? It's us.
And of course, what is more manageable is going back just to the grandparents. But I imagine this goes back generations and generations.
That's a good point because, the research, for example, on epigenetics started in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Mostly the first research was in the 60s, in the late 60s. And the psychoanalytic research started in the 60s. And then in the 90s, the epigenetics neuroscience research started. But also a lot of it, if you think about it, and if you think about that, most of it started with Holocaust survivors and their offsprings. We're really talking about research, psychoanalytic and neuroscience, scientific research that didn't start so long ago. So we have only 3 and maybe now a little bit 4th generations of research. But when people look at the epigenetics changes in animals that live shorter lives, you could see that they could trace it back to 7th and even 8th and 14 generations in worms and in mice, and right. And of course, there is still a question how much that applies to humans, and this is something they still investigate, right?
So, Dr. Galit Altas, will you explain, please, what epigenetics means?
As I said before, epigenetics is the biological mechanism in which a trauma is transmitted and from generation to generation, and the impact of the environment on the expression of genes. And I heard Rachel Yehuda once, one of the biggest researchers on epigenetics, who is also a second generation of Holocaust survivors, talking about the difference between the genes and the expression of genes. And I'm going to repeat what she said because I really loved the way she explained it.
Yes,
she was talking about, imagine that you're baking a cake and the genetic thing is the ingredients.
Right.
And the environmental thing is the temperature in the oven. The cake is not going to come the same thing, even if it has the same ingredients,
right?
If the temperature is different. And so you can imagine the temperature, right, as the environment, the oven, right? And that is, it doesn't change the ingredients are the same, right? And so we see how, right? And so in that thing, they're really talking about how the expression of genes change, and in worms, I think it's like they looked at four that live 4 years. They looked many generations back, and mice who live 2 years. I think they looked, I think 14 generation, and we see how our, if you think about survival, right? A lot of it is really a way to adjust to the environment of the previous generation, and in order to survive, right?
Right.
And so we really analyze how genes are altered in the offsprings of trauma survivors, and study the ways in which the trauma can leave a chemical mark on a person's genes that is passed down. And of course, I think that's the most, to me, important thing, which is related to therapy.
Yeah.
Is that we know that if the environment can alter the expressions of your genes, an environment that is nourishing and the ability to work through things helps you alter things back. And I think that is the hope in that, right? Because when you think about the change in the expression of genes, you think to yourself, oh my God, that means we're really doomed, right? It's like, what are we going to do? Or can we fix it?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And so I think in the book, especially at the end, I'm really talking about, I'm a clinician. I'm not a researcher. And I am talking about how we see the change in people, and of course, supported by the research that people do, how therapy helps alter, right, and impact the expression of genes as well.
Right. Okay. And that axiom which I use, which I find the simplest way to describe it, is that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Have you heard that before?
No, and I really like it. It's really right.
Yes.
It's really true.
It's true. Okay. Yeah, that's how I explain it. And the difference between the DNA being changed and a chemical mark that alters the expression of the genes, so you're saying the DNA does not actually change.
Right.
But something happens biologically that gets transmitted and passed down.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think for me, the knowledge of this is very freeing, and it frees me from some sense of guilt that I am somehow responsible for having actually had to take antidepressants when I was 20 years old. Where did that come from? I was raised in an alcoholic household. Both my parents were alcoholics. And then I started out in life as a food addict, being addicted to sweets. And then as a teenager, became addicted to alcohol. And when I joined this wonderful group that I will say is a 12-step group, and said, oh, I am an alcoholic, which is not in terms of labeling theory, like label, you're an alcoholic, you have the name, might as well play the game. What it is, because I didn't study this for my doctoral dissertation, is the label actually is positive because it's redemptive. I am redeeming myself by saying, yes, I admit I am an alcoholic. And now I'm a proud alcoholic in recovery for decades. I haven't had any alcohol for decades. And so when people are surprised to see if everybody around me is drinking and they say, oh, do you want something to drink? Or I don't say no, thanks. But if they press it, I would say, no, I'm an alcoholic. And they look at me with their mouths open. I'm an alcoholic in recovery, and I'm a proud member of this anonymous group. So I had no shame whatsoever because it's genetic. It's genetic. And of course, both of my parents, they were young parents, and they acted out a lot. And my mother told me too much about her life with my father and my father's teenage life. And that's another thing, when should children be privy to adults like that?
Definitely. You see that. I think what we're talking about really with alcoholism and with any emotional struggle, and definitely with trauma, is about regulation, right? How do you regulate that something is not too much pouring, right? You're throwing up on your children, speaking of alcohol, right? And you're like vomiting all your life on them, and they can, and it's too much, versus how do you repress something, doesn't give anybody access to emotional experience, and doesn't process your own experiences. And I think both extremes are a way to not process, right? To not contain. Because telling your child too much is also a way, right, to project and live something right through another person. It doesn't include the working through that one has to do by themselves. And when I say by themselves, I never think we can do work just alone, but not through our children. I mean, that, right? Or not do it at all. It's either avoiding the work, or doing something that uses another person. And often I think parents use their children in order to really try to process something, but our children cannot be the container of our pain.
Right. Ooh, that's powerful, Dr. Galit Atlas. Our children cannot be the container of our pain.
Yeah.
Wow. And I know that there are so many children, and in my practice, adult children that have were parentified.
Right.
Right. Their parents use them as psychologists.
Yeah.
And you helped me with my pain.
Yeah.
Yes. So the good news for everyone, we are just about finished. We have a minute or two, Dr. Galit Atlas. And the good news for everyone is that we are coming back next week with part 2 of Emotional Inheritance by Dr. Galit, spelled Galit, Atlas. And I assume we can get your book anywhere, Dr. Atlas?
Yeah. Anywhere, all the
Just
books.
Anywhere these days, right?
Yeah.
Anywhere
online.
Emotional Inheritance by Dr. Galit Atlas. So the average person who comes to me, say in their 40s, and they're just miserable, and their relationships are all entangled and messed up, and they're with someone that they think is toxic, and they can't get out of it for various reasons. And we have 1 minute left, and I can't get your answer except for a couple of words. Do you have a couple of words to leave us with for
you know week? What? I am going to leave you like that and promise you that I'll give you a full answer next time. And we will talk about that because this is a really important question.
Wow. So, okay, everybody, I always tell you, I do a 2-part series, and this time you better tune in or listen to us on a podcast. You can always get WHPC 90.3 on a podcast through iHeartRadio, and we have our own application now, and it's all good, okay? So thank you, Dr. Galit Atlas. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.